In 1819, a legal battle erupted that would define the balance of power in the United States for centuries to come. At its center was a simple question: could a state tax a federal institution? But the answer would ignite a revolution in American constitutional law and cement the authority of the federal government in a way never before imagined. This is the story of McCulloch versus Maryland, the landmark case that turned a courtroom into a crucible of national identity. In the early 19th century, the young American Republic was still defining its identity. The Constitution had been ratified only a few decades earlier, and its limits and powers were far from settled. One particularly controversial issue was the role of a national bank, an institution many, including Thomas Jefferson, feared would concentrate too much power in elite hands and threaten state sovereignty. The first Bank of the United States, created in 1791, had already provoked sharp division. Jefferson and his allies believed a federal bank would become a financial monopoly, favoring financiers and merchants over debt-ridden farmers. The bank was a public-private hybrid. The federal government owned $2 million in shares, while private investors held $8 million. Although it expired in 1811, economic instability soon revived the demand for a central institution. In 1816, Congress chartered the Second Bank of the United States. Unlike its predecessor, this bank wielded enormous influence. It extended credit to farmers and businesses, underwrote internal improvements, financed the shipment of agricultural goods both domestically and abroad, and helped stabilize the currency. It became one of the largest companies in the country, and its control over interest rates gave it the power to shape the behavior of state banks. This sweeping influence triggered backlash from those who saw it as a threat to local control and an overreach of federal power. Enter the state of Maryland. In an effort to rein in the bank's reach and discourage it from operating within its borders, Maryland imposed a hefty tax on any non-state chartered bank doing business in the state. The move was more than just a revenue strategy. It was a calculated strike designed to dissuade the federal bank from establishing a branch in Maryland and to assert the state's right to control what it saw as a dangerous federal overreach. James McCulloch, the cashier of the Baltimore branch of the Second Bank, refused to pay the tax. He argued that a state had no right to tax a federal institution. Maryland sued, and the case wound its way to the highest court in the land. What began as a dispute over a $15,000 fine would soon become a constitutional showdown. At the helm of the Supreme Court sat Chief Justice John Marshall, a towering figure in American jurisprudence. In McCulloch versus Maryland, Marshall delivered one of his most influential opinions. He didn't just resolve the immediate conflict. He redefined the relationship between the federal government and the states. First, Marshall tackled whether Congress had the constitutional authority to create a national bank. While the Constitution did not explicitly grant that power, Marshall invoked the necessary and proper clause. He argued that Congress could pass laws not expressly listed in the Constitution if they were instrumental in executing its enumerated powers, like regulating commerce and collecting taxes. Then came the second and perhaps more explosive question: could Maryland tax the bank? Marshall's answer was unequivocal: no. The power to tax involves the power to destroy, he warned. If states could tax federal institutions, they could undermine the authority of the national government itself. The Constitution, Marshall argued, was not a pact among sovereign states. It was the act of a people forming a government supreme within its sphere. Marshall's opinion obliterated the notion that states could stand as co-equals to the federal government when federal authority was properly exercised. The court's ruling established two powerful principles: the doctrine of implied powers and the supremacy of federal law over conflicting state action. The legal scaffolding of modern federalism was now firmly in place. The ruling had sweeping consequences. It gave the federal government the constitutional breathing room to create programs, agencies, and institutions that would have seemed inconceivable in the 18th century. From the New Deal to the Civil Rights Act to Medicare, the legacy of McCulloch runs like a current beneath the surface of American governance. Yet even Marshall's thunderous ruling couldn't guarantee the national bank's survival. In 1832, President Andrew Jackson, no friend of concentrated financial power, ordered the withdrawal of federal deposits, starving the bank of its influence. By 1834, Congress had refused to renew its charter, and the Second Bank of the United States faded into history. Still, the constitutional precedent survived. A century later, banking crises resurrected the idea. In 1913, the Federal Reserve System was born, an institutional descendant of the very principles McCulloch enshrined. The idea that the federal government could manage national finance was no longer radical, it was essential. More broadly, McCulloch v. Maryland laid the foundation for what some call the administrative state, a federal government that reaches into every corner of American life. From environmental protections to labor law to healthcare, the implied powers upheld in 1819 continue to echo through modern governance. Today, McCulloch v. Maryland is more than just a precedent. It's a pillar of American constitutional order. It affirmed that the United States is one nation, not a loose alliance of states. It empowered a federal government strong enough to adapt to new challenges and resilient enough to survive political storms. Every time Congress creates a new agency, every time the federal government acts beyond what's explicitly written in the Constitution, the ghost of McCulloch is present. It's in the fine print, the footnotes, and the foundations of every major national initiative. Because in one courtroom, on one day in 1819, the United States decided what kind of nation it wanted to be. Thanks for watching Footprints of History. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, the past is never just the past. It's the foundation we're standing on today.